Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, as always, we've got a real treat. Grace Stanke is in the house. If you're not familiar, Grace is nuclear engineer, public speaker, and Miss America 2023. Grace, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's fun to be here, and it's fun to always chat and help share stories.
Likewise. Now, those of you who hail from Wisconsin like we do may know the name. And I was a little nervous on the introduction because I can never say the word nuclear correct. Even then, that's like my kryptonite of a word. I just can't say it properly. But Grace, before we get into the fun stuff, tell me about your journey and how you got to either where you are now or got to the point of being Miss America 2023.
Yeah, so one thing that I always like to talk about is I enjoy doing hard things. And I've realized this about myself, honestly, in the past 2 or 3 years, where I love to put myself in a situation where it's focused on overcoming some type of challenge or some type of thing that is unexpected or not, the typical outcome. So I like that sort of thing. And I that's a common pattern throughout my whole life, is one thing that I've grown to identify. So I grew up in Wausau, Wisconsin. Same house my whole life in Rib Mountain. So yep, it's a good time, and I love Wisconsin so much. I no longer live there, unfortunately, but I do plan on moving back someday for sure, especially when it comes to raising a family, because I think it's a great place to do that. But born and raised in Wausau, Wisconsin, went to elementary school and all that good stuff. By the time I got to middle school, I realized I really wanted to be in classes that pushed me and challenged me. So I had a really fun conversation with administrators as a 12-year-old girl where I was like, hey, I'd like to be put in 7th grade math or 8th grade math or whatever it was at the time. And it ended up resulting in that I was able to skip a grade. So skipped a grade, did 6th and 7th all in 1 year. And then by the time I got to high school, I still wanted to push further, specifically in math and science. My methodology is if you have a 4.0, you're not either in hard enough classes or you're not doing enough outside of school. So that's sort of like the person that I am. And I think that speaks to what I kind of have as a personality and a drive. I ended up graduating high school at 17 with the equivalent of an associate's degree from doing dual enrollment. So when I got to college, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life, because I was like, I just like to do hard things. That's all I know. This is, what do I do next? And I ended up pursuing nuclear engineering simply out of spite, which I think is a very fun plot twist, but I thought it sounded really cool. I had no idea what nuclear engineering was. I thought it was going to be bombs, based off of World War II in history class. And I was like, there's a maximum of 2 nuclear reactors in all of America. Like, there's no way this is actually a thing. But I go back home and I'm talking to my dad and I'm like, hey, I'm thinking either nuclear or aerospace engineering. Give me your thoughts. What do you think I should do? He's a civil engineer and he had a successful career. So I was like, I just want your insight. And in a dad fashion, he looks at me and he goes, Grace, don't go into nuclear. There's no future there. Naturally. Do you have daughters? Do you have kids?
Oh,
Chris?
I've got 2. Yeah, they're just like
your mom.
How old
are your daughters?
They're 9. Twins.
Okay. So they're not quite to that scary teenager age yet. But when you tell them not to do something, what do they do?
They want to do it.
Exactly. So that's how I got into nuclear engineering, is my dad told me not to do it. And I will say, I think looking back at the time, had I known anything past what I knew about nuclear in that time, had I known anything, I might have agreed with him. Nuclear was not in a good place 5-6 years ago. But now it's in a very different place. I don't regret it for a second going into it, and we can dive into that. That's a whole nother discussion. It is a very strong and positive career now at this point in time. But part of growing up, going to college, is learning how to pay bills and realizing being an adult sucks. Tuition, not fun. At UW-Madison is where I went. So I ended up competing in the Miss America organization to help pay for school. It's a scholarship organization. And competed for 2 years and ended up, the second year, won Miss Wisconsin in June of 2022. Then December of 2022, I went on to become Miss America 2023. So I just celebrated my 2-year crownversary not too long ago.
Congratulations. That's amazing. So I find it interesting that, by today's standards, it seems as though, and it's easy for me to say being a guy, but a lot of women, especially young women, look past that. Miss America. Like, I don't know if I want to do that.
Mhm.
Um, what sparked the interest? And, a lot of people say they're interested in doing things, but how do you even go about finding out where to begin if you were even interested in pageants? Because there are a lot of young women who start from childhood age. They're doing pageants, and that leads maybe into a Miss America future, but it doesn't sound like that was really your background.
Not a ton, no. And I honestly like there's always a different path that everybody takes. So I can't give like one piece of advice. For me personally, another driving factor for why I did it, I play violin. And I was really, really bad at performing. Like I was not good at performing. I would forget music, I would shake. Obviously, that impacts your performance quality. And I was looking for more performance opportunities. So that's how I ended up finding the Miss America program overall was another opportunity to perform my violin and ended up really enjoying everything else that it had to offer. I think one thing for me personally that I live by that this doesn't necessarily apply to just pageants, that it applies to almost everything. My mom always raised me with the idea of do something that scares you every day, whether it's ranging from trying broccoli because I've hated broccoli since I was 6 years old. Maybe today I'll like it, but then all the way up to, going skydiving or applying for a job that you don't think you are qualified for, but maybe you are. Maybe you're underestimating yourself and what you have to bring to the table. Try something every single day that scares you. And that's kind of like one of the things that I think helped push me into doing something like this because it is pretty unusual. Like it's not, I don't really have the background that most people would expect going into it. But I'm very thankful I did because the skills that I gained coming out of that experience and the other experiences that I've had because of that whole like motto of try something new every day, I've been able to just do some awesome things that I would have never thought I would do.
Yeah, I want to come back to this Miss America stuff and talk about the path that you go on once you decide that this is something you want to do. But because you talked about your parents a couple of times already, you've indirectly pointed to the fact that your parents have been a big part of your
Yeah.
success and kind of gotten to where you are now.
Mhm.
Talk about the impact they've made on you, kind of growing up from being a child to where you are now.
Yeah, I'm very, very thankful for my entire family in so many ways. Like, they truly helped raise me to be the woman I am today and are really a big part of it. My dad, I mentioned, he's a civil engineer. He's now retired. But another thing that sort of played a major role in my childhood, he went through cancer twice throughout me growing up, which is a really interesting thing for a family unit psychologically, right? Because you've got intense stress like on the parental relationship, and then now you have to explain it to your three kids. I was the youngest at the time. My siblings are 5 and 6 years older than me, so you've got this just really unusual dynamic that nobody knows how to handle that situation. Nobody knows what to do. Nobody knows how to have that conversation. But we ended up really like as a family growing in a lot of different ways and becoming a lot closer. And even my dad's perspective on life changed. I think we talk about this a lot. Like pre-cancer, dad was very conservative, like thinking about the future and like almost to the point of like too far, if that makes sense. But now, like post cancer, dad he is very big into restoring cars and he loves Dodge specifically. So Dodge is one of their slogans is live fast. And he's now like, I kind of live by that. Okay, dad. So he's very in the moment and like a lot more spontaneous versus like the structured engineer, always got to have a plan and an agenda and a written itinerary type thing. So it's really been, I'm very thankful because my parents supported me in a lot of ways, but they also made sure that I had to face my own challenges and things like that. Even when it comes to work and paying for school. They helped a little bit, but not all of it. Like I was paying for most of my way through school. I started working when I was 14 years old. I was a waitress at IHOP. It was a great time. It was Saturday and Sunday mornings. I was there serving pancakes. It was a good time. But then they made sure that we're always looking for the next thing that we're looking to take on. And I'm really thankful for how my parents brought me up. my dad with the engineering perspective, my mom was a little bit more like the communications perspective. And it's fun because my brother ended up becoming an electrical engineer. My sister is an English teacher in South Korea. And then I've got sort of
Wow.
like this blend of engineering, and I do a ton of communication work with nuclears. So it's really awesome, and I'm very, very thankful for them.
I find it fascinating being a parent of a teenager and two 9-year-old girls, the impact that parenting can make. And even
Yeah.
from the young age of just making sure your children are curious. And we have a rule that I eat almost anything. Well, only a couple of things I won't eat. And our kids are a little bit picky, but for 9-year-olds, they are far more advanced in eating like edamame and sushi and crab and things like that.
Oh, awesome.
And I always say, like, you don't have to like it, but you do have to try it. Just
Hmm.
we ask you to take one bite, and it's not uncommon. They take a couple bites and then they find out maybe they don't like something, and that's fine. But boy, have we really discovered things that we like, and whether it be playing soccer, going to summer camp, trying new foods. I just think it's so important to get your kids outside their comfort zone because that's where the magic happens for adults and true of children. So that's why I wanted to go there. But I'm still very fascinated by the Miss America path. And I say that partially because having an older sister and a mother, I saw it on TV quite a bit and always thought it was kind of interesting, even being a guy. And so I'm curious, you can take us on a path of what that looks like. So Grace Stanke says, "That's it, mom and dad. I'm going to do this thing." What does that
Yeah.
look like? And not just for you, what was your path like, but what's the path like for someone who wants to be a contestant?
Yeah, it's honestly very similar to like athletics in a lot of ways. Just in terms of the level of dedication that you want to put into it is what you'll get out of it. Is very much so my perspective. It starts with a local competition, so you sign up for a nearby competition. I know in the state of Wisconsin, if you just go on misswisconsin.com, they have a big list of all of the different locals across the state. And if you win said local, then that local title gives you an opportunity to go to Miss Wisconsin, and you compete for Miss Wisconsin. If you win Miss Wisconsin, you go to Miss America, so on and so forth. I will say, like, one like little nuance: you can only win a state title once, right? You can only go to the national competition once. But otherwise, I mean, the competition itself, it's changed throughout time. Historically, it was founded, the Miss America competition started in 1921 as a swimsuit competition on the boardwalk of Atlantic City to try and get tourists to come back after Labor Day. Like, that's what it started as. The swimsuit competition was removed entirely in 2018. We have added scholarships. The social impact initiative has become a crucial role in the Miss America organization. I know since like I've passed on the title, there's always like changes that are happening too behind the scenes that I'm not necessarily fully in touch with anymore. I just want to like say that as a disclaimer. But I know that like talent is still a part of the competition. We still have interview, and for me personally, those interview skills, honestly, any engineering job interview I've done is so easy in comparison to the Miss America interviews. Not in a way that like the Miss America interviews are scary, but because it teaches you how to portray yourself professionally while also delivering a point about what you want to say about yourself as a person, but then also delivering like whatever professional point it may be. So if it's about your social impact initiative, for me it was educating the public about electricity and energy and where it comes from, and how we as people, your power bill isn't just a bill that you don't have a choice in. You have the ability to influence that power bill at the end of the month. So talking about things like that in an interview, what does your social impact initiative actually do? That's it, things like that. But talent, interview, evening gown. I had a phase of competition called Social Impact Pitch when I competed, where we gave a brief speech on stage. So that helped me with like forcing public speaking and things like that. And learning a little bit more about speech writing processes too, which honestly for me, it's become a big part of my life. Public speaking is something that I do quite frequently now. And honestly, I love it. I have a ton of fun doing it. And you don't really get that experience in engineering school. So it was a great avenue for me to learn that stuff otherwise.
Grace, when you're speaking now, which you do a lot of, what is your subject? What's some of your points that you try to drive home?
I have a variety of different things that I talk about. So, ranging from like empowerment and inspirational speeches, I'll talk about things like that journey to becoming Miss America and then the year that followed after, because I think that there were a lot of challenges throughout that year that people experience on a day to day basis. You know, loneliness, right? I was on the road for a year straight pretty much. I'd go home about twice a month and sometimes I was home for literally 8 hours. Like I would land, go home, do laundry, maybe hug my parents, sleep, and then get back up and get back on a plane. So it was a very lonely year and something that I think people have that same issue. So how can you change those things? But then also making sure to recognize what challenges can I take on myself from just me, stemming from just myself. So building that confidence in each person. So those are a little bit more the motivational, inspirational type speeches. And then on the like energy education side, I do a variety of different things with energy education, describing just simply what is electricity, where does it come from, what are different types of power generation, all the way into like I'd say a more internal nuclear niche about what do we as an industry internally from nuclear need to be doing moving forward to continue growing. Right now, artificial intelligence, data centers, all of that stuff is playing a pretty big role in nuclear science and energy's growth. So that's been a very, very big focus in the past like 6 months or so, I'd say.
So if we go back to Miss America, I
Mhm.
think about as I've watched it, I've come across it online. You could zoom out and you look at competition and you see 50 women.
Mhm.
How do you differentiate? Because everyone's competing in the gowns, everyone's competing in the skills. How do you stand out? Because I feel like that's got to be a big component of um, getting to the top five, getting to the top three, and being a finalist.
Yeah, I'll be honest, that's a better question for a judge that has judged it. But one thing that I will say that I personally believe in, and I know that this isn't like great to hear all the time, but in the context of Miss America, right? They are looking for someone. It's a job interview, essentially, right? They are looking for somebody. They have an intention behind who they're selecting in a way that sometimes you might not fit the bill for that year. And it sucks because you only get one shot at becoming Miss America. But there is a certain reality behind the context of the competition that I personally believe you can do the work to get into the top 10 or whatever number that they have that they're calling for that year. It's been 15, it's been 10, I don't know. And I think you can do the work for that no matter who you are. But past that, honestly, this is where like maybe I am a little bit religious. Like I think that it's out of your hands and everything happens for a reason. Because for me personally, I didn't go into the competition saying like I'm gonna be Miss America 2023. That wasn't my intention. I wanted to put my best foot forward. I wanted to stay true to who I was and make sure that I represented myself fully and wholeheartedly. I wanted to walk away from the competition with no regrets. I didn't want to have to say like, oh, I wish I had done that or said that or done that a little bit differently with my talent. I wanted to walk away 100% as who I was. And I was equally excited to do that and move on with my life in a way of graduating college. I was planning on moving to Arizona at the time. Like I had all of these plans that I was so thrilled for that I was excited to bring that to the table and talk about it. And then I was equally excited to become Miss America 2023 and live out that year then. So personally, like it's tough because there's so many different ways to differentiate women because everybody has different interests, everybody has different appeals, but it's up to you as a person to put the work in to make sure that you are representing yourself fully and truly.
Yeah. What do you think is the hardest part of the competition?
I think it varies from person to person. Like, are you looking for a phase of competition or just the overall aspect?
Maybe for you, what was the hardest part for you in competing and once you got into the competition?
Throughout time, initially the hardest thing was like getting out of my own head, right? I did the work, I did the practice, I put the time in that all I would have to do during competition week or day or whatever would be just to hit play. And like I knew what I did. I know what I've put in and I'm confident in what I have to bring to the table. I think that was honestly the biggest challenge to overcome, that by the end of it, I did feel that confidence where I sat down in that interview room and it's, it's public. Like you can go watch the interview on that. How I finished the interview was I said, I'm ready for the job of Miss America, but are you ready for me? Because I'm like, I'm going to go do whatever I want, whether I'm Miss America or not. Right. So it was really fun for me to go through that process of growing and developing that confidence overall. And I think that's something that is a challenge for a lot of people because maybe Miss America isn't the place to do that. Maybe it is in some form of athletics or musical instruments or the workplace or whatever it might be. But developing that confidence, I think, is one of the strongest skill sets that anybody as a human being can develop.
So, being a role model for a lot of younger women, how would you recommend someone get out of their own head? Because from the outside looking in, you tell the story about how you grew up, skipped a grade, you were sounded very ambitious. I'm surprised to hear you say that, getting out of your own
Yeah.
head, because I would have assumed that that comes with a lot of confidence. But everyone fights a little imposter syndrome from now and
Mhm.
again. So, what would be your advice to someone who, and believe me, I could take the advice too. I think we all could. For getting
Yeah.
out of their own head.
Well, just to note, I am not a professional psychologist or therapist or anything, but one thing that I honestly like, the best way I can say it is gaslight yourself. Like so internally when you're scared, right? And you tell yourself, "Okay, I'm going to fake being confident." And you go out there and give a speech and you're faking the confidence. The audience can't tell the difference between fake
Right.
and real confidence. Right? So like it's just like fake it till you make it in a way, or gaslight yourself, which is, like I said, not a great way to phrase it, but it's the most direct and effective way to phrase it that I can think of at this point in time. There's a lot of things that it's okay to do it scared, as long as you are comfortable with not showing it, right? You can feel that inside. That is something that's a completely valid thought, no matter who you are, no matter what situation you're in, whether it's picking up the phone because your boss is cold calling you, or if it is giving a keynote speech in front of 1,000 people, right? Any of those circumstances, if you make sure that you take the time to practice that strong, confident delivery, whether you are confident and there and present or not, the other person can't tell the difference, and that's a very powerful skill because as soon as they can't tell the difference and you realize that, I think real confidence really starts to creep in a little bit more then.
I would tend to agree with that. I love that. Okay, Grace, what's the biggest lesson you've learned from competing in this event? I know you mentioned that one of the greatest skills that you've acquired is public speaking, which I think, boy, a lot of people would love to have that skill. But as you zoom out now, you've been removed from the program for a while. What do you think your biggest lesson learned is?
Staying true to you and your values and your morals, right? That was the most important thing that I learned, not only through the competition experience, but throughout my year as Miss America too, because there's a lot of people that have insight or comments or advice or things that they think should happen. And it's wonderful to have those conversations and receive that insight. But being able to sort through that and realize that not every single piece of advice needs to be taken, because it's not true to you, because it doesn't follow your code of ethics or morals or whatever it might be that you want to identify with. Um, I think that was a really important lesson for me to learn throughout life. And it's been a lot of fun because then now moving into like closing that chapter and the next part, I was able to go through and create a completely brand new position in the nuclear industry that combines technical engineering and external communications, right? And that's because I'm like, this is my skill set. I know I can do the engineering work. I know that I can do the communications to the general public. And I know that we don't have this right now. So I'm the person to bring to the table with this. And I wanted to stay true to who I am and make sure that that could happen. And honestly, I'm very, very thankful for that. I know that it's a different path than what most people would take, but I kind of firmly believe that had I even not become Miss America, I still would have ended up in a position like this because I may have started as just an engineer, but I think 2 or 3 years into it, I would have made it clear that, I love working in communications and being able to work with the general public on this information as well. So in that capacity, I think that I'm very thankful for those skills and that lesson of just staying true to me, my values, what brings me joy, and just keeping that sort of like narrow focus on that.
Yeah, narrow focus is key if you have big goals in mind, no doubt. So I'm curious to learn more about nuclear engineering because it's not something I have a lot of knowledge about. And I'm
Yeah.
guessing there are a lot of folks listening who have an idea of what it is. But as you've mentioned, the industry has changed a lot since before you decided this is what you were going to study in college. So can you talk a little bit more about your current role and what this industry looks like?
Yeah. So my current role is a nuclear fuels engineer and clean energy advocate. So 60% of my job is being what's called a cycle manager. So when nuclear power plants have their uranium, they decay to the point that it's not creating enough electricity to justifiably run it anymore. They do a reload. So they put new uranium in, they take out some of the old stuff, they cycle through it. So that's called a cycle, and it ranges from anywhere from 12 months to up to 24 months for the commercial reactors that we have today. People are slowly extending the lifetime of a cycle, and fuel typically stays in for about 3 cycles. So about a third of the reactor core gets replaced every refueling outage or cycle. So that's like the technical side of what I do is I help with the cycle management of planning out that next reload. So creating tools for operators and people on the power plant site to use to successfully run the next cycle. So that was like really jargony, I feel like. But the way I like to think about it is writing the words on a page in a book, right? So we do one little word for this big book and this big project. And it all comes together. So nuclear engineers are kind of like authors in a way. But then the other 40% of my job, clean energy advocate, is a lot of external facing things. So ranging from recording podcasts to giving speeches to creating social media content, writing blogs and op-eds and things like that. Pretty much anything external facing, both online and in person. Which I have a ton of fun because, like Nuclear Science Week, I got to go to schools across the country and do science experiments with them and get them involved in STEM and talk about nuclear energy and the job opportunities that it has. But nuclear as a whole, that's a good bridge into where nuclear is at. So I want to take a step back because in 2019, when I had that conversation with my dad and he said, no, don't do it. There was a little over 90 reactors in America, creating about 20% of America's electricity. A lot of them were at risk of shutting down. Some did, right? Some were able to save themselves in some way, whether it was getting the right policy or whatever it was. So in that capacity, today, we're now growing. We're restarting reactors that were shut down in that 2019 timeframe. So 3 Mile Island Unit 1, which I think is an interesting, that's one that I think people listening will automatically be like, what? So 3 Mile Island is a famous site just because of a partial meltdown that happened in 1979. Now, one thing to note is there's 2 units, so 2 different reactors at 3 Mile Island. One of them, only one had the partial meltdown, and after the partial meltdown, there was radiation that was released to the public that was within the limits. There was no danger. There was no extreme risk to the public when that happened. I just want to note that. So that all happened in 1979. That reactor shut down, but the other reactor continued running until 2019. And it was one of the best performing reactors ever in America. It was safe, it was effective, it was reliable. It was a great reactor. So it shut down in 2019 just because of the context of the time. Policy wasn't in favor. It just wasn't, nuclear was not in its peak or prime at that point. Now, since then, 2024 has been a really exciting year after probably 2 years of pretty immense growth in terms of public perception and acceptance of nuclear energy and science as a whole. AI and data centers have now stepped in. So we have Microsoft, NVIDIA, Amazon, Google, all of these massive tech companies that are signing deals with nuclear companies to create new facilities or restart old facilities to power their data centers, because these data centers require enough electricity to power a small city. That is not sarcasm. It is true.
I've heard.
Yeah, hundreds to thousands of megawatts, depending on the size of the data center. Nuclear is clean, it's effective, it's reliable, and it is safe. It's safer to work in a nuclear power plant than it is to work at a grocery store. It's actually, you get as much radiation from eating a banana than you do living next to a power plant for a year, a nuclear power plant for a year. So that's it's something that I want people to recognize, that radiation, nuclear science, all of these things are a part of our daily life. Just because a nuclear power plant uses that science for good doesn't make it scary. So nowadays, AI, data centers, those all play a pretty big role. Policy, we've had a ton of amazing bills passed at the federal level. Nuclear is actually probably one of the few bipartisan issues in America, which there's not many of those. We've been able to see the Advance Act is incredible because it was almost a unanimous pass at the federal level. And that's like amazing to see that. Almost a unanimous vote of yes in Congress. So it's been a really exciting time. And right now I work in continuing maintaining the current operating fleet in America. My 2 plants that I primarily work on are in Illinois, but I work on 4 that are across the country. So those 2 in Illinois, there's 1 in New York and 1 in Maryland then as well that I work on a lot. So it's really cool because you get to know that you're working on a facility that is powering a hospital that is helping deliver somebody's baby. You know, it's just like those little things that electricity is not a essential thing to live, but it's become an essential part of society. And it's been really amazing to sort of be a part of this process to help create energy and electricity, which is something I never thought I would be saying because it sounds so boring, but like it really is awesome to be a part of.
Okay, note to self: buy some nuclear stocks.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I'm not saying anything, but also like keep an eye on it. Look at a variety of different nuclear stocks. It is a very crazy time right now that we're in, and it's exciting. It's exciting. I don't know
You
what
mentioned
I
that
can't
I think it
say.
was 2017. There were 90 reactors, which equated to 20% of the country's energy. Is that correct?
The 90 is an approximation. I don't know the exact amount at
Okay.
that time. We had a couple shut down. Today we're at 96, I believe.
Okay.
So 2 new reactors reopened in Georgia, or 2 completely new reactors opened in Georgia, and that was very, very exciting. So Vogtle has 4 nuclear reactors at it. It is the largest power generating facility, I believe, in America. There might be a hydroelectric facility that's bigger, but yeah.
So moving forward, obviously we've got a new regime coming in Washington. What does it look like in 2025 and beyond in terms of how many reactors and what nuclear will look like
Yeah.
for the future?
Oh, well, that's the $1 million question. That's the $1 billion question, probably more like it. So we have a lot of political support for nuclear and for building a strong, reliable, and resilient energy grid. But ultimately, nuclear still faces a lot of challenges with supply chain and then making sure that it's got the right customers and getting that initial investment. Now, those challenges are slowly being solved. Because of things like Microsoft and Nvidia and Google and Amazon and all of these massive tech companies that have the money to build nuclear. 14 of the world's largest banks in September of this year at New York Climate Week said that they would be supporting loans to build new nuclear. Just yesterday, the Department of Energy gave out a $15 billion loan to P&G out in California to enhance and I want to say like reinvigorate the California grid with renewable energy or some type of clean energy. And so there's a lot of like interesting problems that we have that are being solved actively. Moving forward, I would be so thrilled. I do believe that in the next 4 years, we'll definitely hear about new builds being announced. I can't say that they'll be completed within 4 years because right now nuclear power plants probably in the past, Vogtle 3 and 4, the 2 that just reopened or that just have opened, they took about 10 years to build. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of capital. I do think that that's going to be minimized though for these next new build reactors because what have we learned from those 2 builds that we can apply to these next ones? And additionally, because of policy changes, I think some challenges will change during that construction process as well if there are new builds that we see here in America.
Is it possible to build one in 5 years?
I mean, I'm not going to like say yes or no. I think it's very possible in my personal opinion. I think it's very, very possible. That would be if it's announced like tomorrow, which honestly may not be a totally out there thing. But it's something that we have the workforce in place because of Vogtle 3 and 4, which is exciting because we've got that little bit more expertise. By the way, I'm just like going to give a little shout out because if you're a construction worker, if you're somebody who's a highly skilled tradesman or tradeswoman, nuclear is a great place to work. Like great pay, great benefits, very safe. As I mentioned, safer to work there than at a grocery store. Like that's the sort of stuff that I do highly recommend it. Just my little recruitment plug for pretty much anywhere in nuclear. And we have a nuclear power plant in Wisconsin. There is one there.
Is that the one in Wrightstown?
It's
Superior?
up by Manitowoc. It is the Point Beach generating facility. So
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
14% of Wisconsin's electricity comes from it.
Wow, I had no idea. Very
Yeah,
cool.
fun fact for you.
So when you talk about energy, what else is happening in the energy space, and what do you kind of foresee being the next big thing in energy? Because obviously, a lot of people talking about going green, reducing their carbon footprint, and that's I think it's going to remain a topic of conversation for quite some time.
One thing that I believe, I personally, this is all just my opinion, I personally believe will happen in terms of the overall scene because we have this massive load growth happening over the next couple of years because of data centers, because of AI. We're going to see a lot of innovation in terms of like our fridges, our AC units, our lights, everything like that to become much more energy efficient because load growth is going to increase. So our demand on electricity is going to increase, but supply is pretty much staying the same. There isn't a ton of growth right now or growth planned. There is not enough growth planned in terms of the supply side of electricity. So economics, all of that stuff, electricity prices are going to go up. So because of that, I think in terms of like how it's going to affect us as human beings who pay bills at the end of the month and get frustrated because it gets higher and higher, it feels like, I think we're going to see a ton of innovation in terms of those like home appliances and things like that that are going to become more energy efficient. The energy grid overall, I personally believe will start diversifying immensely. You know, right now we have about 20% in nuclear. Not as much comes from renewables as people think for what we have, but if we continue building and expanding on that and making those better technologies, they can play a better role in our energy grid overall. And then additionally, you know, maybe revisiting some of the hydroelectric facilities that we have. There are tons of dams across the country that are just dams. They don't create electricity. They just dam up the water to help control the river and things like that. So it's going to be a very, in my personal opinion, energy is going to become a very political subject very soon. It already kind of is, but it's going to become one of the most pressing issues in America moving forward, in my opinion.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we could talk about energy all day. You make it actually fascinating for once, rather than to hear it from, the political banter of left and right. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate you diving into that.
I try to make it fun, and I think that it is something that, like, it's really amazing because for me as a consumer, right, I feel like this is something that, we have almost a right to, right? That's what I think people as consumers feel, but it is a luxury, right? And especially here in America, it is a luxury that we don't necessarily realize that it's a luxury. One of the things that I do internationally is working with countries where electricity is not a common resource. It is not always there. It is not always reliable for people. But here in America, it's a very different setting. So I think it's really amazing to sort of be on both ends of this spectrum in terms of creating the electricity and understanding what it looks like from this private business side. But then also, there's other electricity generators in America that are government run. So you have so many different perspectives and applications, and like from the consumer side, there's so much. Like I could also talk about energy for hours, but I won't do that.
No, it's interesting to hear it, as I mentioned, without a political narrative, because so often when it comes from one side or the other, there is a narrative, and that's unfortunate because it's good to hear about, those reminders about conserving energy, because it's something we can all do and we should be doing. And then just to be educated about nuclear and the other options and other types of energy that are out there, because I think, like you said, we take it for granted, we overlook it, and it is very much a luxury. And we should be reminded of that over and over again. But Grace, as we put a bow on this conversation, I'm just curious, what is next for you?
What's next for me? Well, in terms of like life overall, one thing that I think a lot of Wisconsinites will love is I love to water ski. So for me personally, what's next is hopefully learning my wake tricks. So toe line Wakos is my next big thing for water skiing. But otherwise, ultimately, my next big thing is really I'm pursuing an MBA next year. I'm getting married next year as well. So there will be a name change. Lots of stuff going on. On top of taking on a lot of responsibility at work now too, since I'm sort of out of that new hire honeymoon training phase, I call it. But then also going through and just making sure that I'm pursuing happiness. I think for me, success is not always determined by a title. It's not determined by a degree or anything like that. It's determined by who you are inside and like how you feel and are you satisfied. Happiness is what fuels success. So for me personally, I'm always going to be pursuing that happiness, whether it's going on super long hikes with my dog, going water skiing. I love to hike and spend time in the outdoors. So I love mountain climbing and things like that. I'm still contemplating because I've started climbing the 7 summits. So the highest summits on each continent. I did Kilimanjaro in Africa this year. And I'm really contemplating if I want to do Denali or not. So if there are any listeners that have done Denali and have advice, please send me messages. But I'm very conflicted if I want to do it or not. That's Denali is the one in North America. That's the highest one. It's in Alaska. But yeah, so that's sort of the stuff that's next for me, just living life and enjoying it ultimately, which is the most important thing for everybody.
I love that. Great answer. For anyone out there listening, this will be my last question. What would be your recommendation for someone who does want to pursue happiness? You seem to have this crystallized, and I love this. And the reason I'm asking is I've asked this question before to people, and they don't have a vision. They don't really know what they want. So if you don't know what you want, it's really hard to identify how to pursue happiness.
Well, I think that brings up a really interesting point because you don't always know what you want, right? Like I couldn't tell you. I personally despise the question of like, oh, what do you want your life to look like in 5 years? Because I'm like, I can tell you something, but I promise you it's not going to happen. And like,
Right.
also, okay, if I'm too focused on creating that vision, is that going to close doors to opportunities that I would miss then?
Probably.
I personally think it's completely okay to not know, what you want or what you want to do. But what I don't think is okay is to just let opportunities pass you by, right? That's where I'm going to come back to like those two things that I was raised on. One, try something new every day, whether it's little all the way up to big. Try something new no matter what it is, because you don't know what'll come of it. You don't know what passion you might find. You don't know if it's going to fizzle out and then you're going to hate it, right? And that's okay because then you've ruled out an option of what you don't want to do. But then to also make sure that you do it scared. Because that is something that I think no matter how scary every situation might seem, I promise you somebody else in that room is scared. Or perhaps, you making sure that you can mask that, people can't tell the difference. Those are really going to be the two biggest things. And there's no right way, there's no wrong way, there's no clear path. But you'll never know if you don't try, is my biggest thing.
Yeah, I like your point about, zooming out 3 or 5 years. We do a lot with vision at Hustle Nation. And one of the things I always tell people is that I think it's crazy to look out 5 years or 10 years because your life will change. You could be a very different person then. And that's okay. It's probably a good thing. But ultimately, when I ask that question, I always ask them, what do you want this year? What would a great 2024, or maybe in this case, when we're recording this, what would a great 2025 look like for you? It's a lot easier to crystallize that than it is to kind of predict your life or what your life should look like then when it could be a lot different.
Yeah. I think having a direction is very beneficial for answering that question when you don't know. So like I'm going to come back to like I love to water ski, right? But I now live in Delaware and there's not as many lakes, there's not as many like opportunities to really get out and water ski, but we do have the ocean close by and sailing is a really big thing. So I'm like, okay, I like sailing and I like to spend time I like water skiing, so I like to spend time on the water, so let's try sailing, right? So I think it's important to like make sure that you know a direction of what you like, because that will help sort of define those parameters of what to try next. If there is something that you're like, hey, I'm looking for a new hobby, which I will say as a 22-year-old living in a completely new state that I know nobody, finding new hobbies is so hard, but I promise you it is possible. Like just sign up for that random free class that is being offered. You never know who you're going to meet at that class, and you never know if you're going to love it.
Grace, is your future fiance okay with beer, cheese, and Green Bay Packers?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes, he's from Wisconsin as well. So I think
Perfect.
that's an
I like him
important thing to
already.
mention. Yes, we are both Packers fans living in a land of fear of Eagles fans. So yeah.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Well,
it's
Grace,
not bad.
I appreciate you being here. Thanks so much for your time. Before I let you go, can you tell our audience where they can find you and what else you might have going on?
Yeah, I am pretty much on any social media, Instagram and like TikTok. It's at Grace.Stanke. LinkedIn and Facebook, it's just Grace Stanke. And please give a follow. Keep an eye out because I've got a lot of really fun projects that I'm personally working on, with ranging from TED Talks to writing a book and things like that. So I appreciate it if you guys give me a follow. You get to learn all about nuclear energy and sort of keep tabs on what I'm doing throughout life as well.
Yes. Well, thank you. I'm excited about the book and all these cool things you've got going on. I will give you a follow. Thank you so much for being here. To the audience, thank you for investing more time in the Hustle Nation podcast. And if you haven't already, please do us a huge favor. Consider leaving us a review. It only takes a minute, but it makes a major impact. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. We'll see you next time. Peace.